let's move on to Genesis Phase 3. All right, so Genesis Phase 3 Part 1. I do believe this, I think it was either 2 or 3 parts, but either way, it started at 139:15 in the actual CitizenCon video if you're watching the whole day one broadcast. And this was by Ian Duforay, the technical designer level 2. So he talked about location density and exploration. So when we talk about locations, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about quality. We're talking about uniqueness. We're talking about whether it matters to a specific player, things like that, right? But what do we mean when we say things like uniqueness, right? So is it a frontier for settlements, or is it high tech for like emergency settlements, or is it utilitarian for bunkers and distribution centers? So all of those things will be different. So when we try to make it matter to a specific player, right, we're talking about narrative development. So we're talking about story stuff, like why do I want to go to a different location? Why do I care that the locations are different, right? And so that's where density comes in, right? Their idea of density is that you should see something every 100 meters. So if you're driving, there should be something interesting every 100 meters. I'm not sure who did that first, but if I remember it after making this video, then I'll pop it up here on the screen. But other than that, I'm pretty sure that's kind of the like MMO rule, or the RPG rule is like every 100 meters the player should have something interesting. And it might have been Bethesda, the guys who did Skyrim and Starfield and you know, all those games. I think those are the folks that kind of figured out the like interesting thing every 100 meters thing. So if that's correct, I won't pop anything on the screen here. So what does that all mean, right? So, you know, it starts with like coherency, right? So tighter stories, you know, everything is near everything else, right? It's not just like one point over there and then you got to go on this stupid mission where you just going to one spot and then coming all the way back for that one thing. You want things to be kind of near each other. So for logical exploration, you know, not having to go super far for those single things, right? You have the mining cluster rules and mining cluster targets, right? So remember, we're still talking about Genesis here, but what we're talking about now is like, what are the rules for the things rather than the weather, the environments and things like that, right? So if we're creating a mining cluster for logic, right? And I say we, I'm not talking about me. I'm just saying like in general. I'm not a CIG dev yet. Anyway, so logical exploration. So mining cluster rules, right? So if we're creating a mining cluster, right, it has to be near a resource, and generally we want it to be on a lawful planet, right? Because most people aren't going to go mining in the unlawful sectors. Generally, unless those are a little bit more out of the way. So let's just give this rule, you know, near a resource on a lawful planet, right? And then mining cluster targets, right? So where do we want these things, like what are these things going to affect, right? So we know if it needs to be near a resource on a lawful planet, then we might say cave, right? We want caves to be near mining clusters, right? So that's a target for the rule. And then we have mining outposts. We obviously want mining outposts around these mining clusters, right? And then trade outposts, because people don't just want to mine and then go refine it. We also want to trade it. We want to sell it. We want to give it to somebody, right? And then what is the data that's relevant to that, right? So what weapons, right? So when we say weapons, we're just talking about FPS controlled things, right? So maybe you need weapons because there's going to be certain fauna that you run into, certain animals that you run into where you need weapons specific to hurting those particular animals, right? So I know in a later thing we'll talk about a certain animal that will be in caves, and if you kill enough of those, then a bigger one will come, and then you're just in a mess. So Yeah, so what weapons are best against that particular animal, and then what loadouts are best, and then outside of just like weapons you shoot at things with, there's also the idea of you know the weapons that you use for mining, like the FPS mining laser, and then salvage and all those other things can come into play at some point, right? So, and data is really important because that will also determine like what factions are in the area, what commodities are in the area, and Starchitect is kind of trying to bring all of that stuff together and have it to be where they can just put some rules in, and then all of this stuff just creates itself. Now, it might take time to do, and it might take, they might have to watch it grow to make sure it doesn't like blow up, at some space, right? So like imagine let's say it takes like 8 hours for a planet to create itself, right? After they put in the rules, right? They might watch it, come back every hour just to make sure it's growing correctly and that the rules aren't breaking something. And then they keep watching it until it's fully grown, right? And that now, if it takes them 8 hours, I'm speculating by saying 8 hours, but if it takes them 8 hours, and it used to take them, like, because they had to do everything manually, it used to take them 8 months. You could imagine how that's much better, right? And now they can get to 100 systems, and maybe even more than that. But now the fact that they could do that is really cool. Now, I don't think it'll take 8 hours. It probably will take like I said, like for a whole planet, probably like 8 months, at least for the first one, right? And then after that, maybe 4 months, and then 2 months, and then they'll, probably start getting it down. But Starchitect is got a lot of things, right? So it's got these scatter modules and locations, right? So a cluster, right? This is when they did the zoom out thing, right? You saw like what a cluster looks like. It was like 13 locations. They were all generated near each other. So we did like the mining cluster. Then you had the distribution center, and then there was a forward operating base, a mining outpost, caves, and that was all one cluster, right? Then if you get a group of clusters, right, that creates a sector, and then you could have a salvage cluster along with your mining cluster, right? And then a planet is a group of sectors, right? So it has sectors, sectors can contain all these different things in them, but that's what a planet is. It just has a bunch of sectors all over it. All right. And so that's kind of the way that they can, zoom in and zoom out. So you're affected at all the levels. Right. And then I think when they got out, they zoomed all the way out. It was like 3,000 points of interest or something like that, which was absolutely insane. And it's great. And that's what I'm glad that they're moving towards that. And then there's the logical rule set. Right. So we talked about the mining outpost earlier, so let's keep with that. So rules, distance to the resource, right? Like it's not just how like that it's near a resource. We need to know what the distance is to the resource, right? And we need to know what the distance is to water, because maybe certain tools require water to operate, or in order to refine them you need water. The targets, right? We still do the rules and targets, right? Because you set the rules and then you need to know what are these rules going to connect to. And that's your mining buildings, your houses, your power buildings, right? And then let's say maybe we're doing a farm. So the rules for that are going to be a little bit different, because now we need to know temperature, soil type, seed mapping, farm buildings, power buildings, houses, animals. This is the difference between like what the rules are for a farm and what the rules are for a mining outpost. And then maybe if there's a derelict ship, you don't need as many rules, right? You just have the distance to like some anti-air thing that was shooting stuff, right? So like obviously you want to show that the anti-air works and that there's a bunch of ships that didn't make it past the anti-air, right? And maybe you want that to be in some mountains or something, right? Because they should be scattered kind of all over the place, but within a certain distance to the anti-air. And then, the target is crash ship parts, right? Because obviously people are going to come to the derelicts and try to, get the stuff out. And there was a video actually, I think on day 2, that kind of showed that there were like stuff inside water where you will be able to find wreckage, and salvage it with your vulture and things like that. And they talked about having full control of this entire system. So this isn't just something that they talked about and They only have control at one part, or at the beginning. They have full control over this. And then they talked about having this improved mission experience. So archetype and function, mining, farming, and a homestead. And then you have the factions and the loadouts, right? And whether it's lawful, whether it's unlawful, whether it's unoccupied. All right. And so that all creates, that's kind of your intro to Genesis Phase 3, Part 1. But we still got more Genesis Phase 3 to go, because I think they did, it's either 2 or 3 parts, I can't remember, but let's say 3 for now, and if it's not 3, then you'll just go to Genesis Phase 4. All right, next we'll do Genesis Phase 3 Part 2. All right, so we're ready to do Genesis Phase 3 Part 2. So this, I believe, started at 1 hour and 51 minutes and 40 seconds if you're watching the full day 1 video. This was done by Francesco Riccucci. I think I'm saying it right. And they're the AI director. So dynamic world interaction, that means no more designer-driven locations, more AI-driven, right? So we talked about this when we talked about Part 1 of Genesis Phase 3. So basically, the designer doesn't have to go in and plot everything. Starchitect is going to just build it all based on the rules and the targets that they put in, right? And so this creates, you have more emergent environments, right? So you have, as things happen, as players interact with the world, certain situations emerge and certain environments will emerge, right? So let me give you an example, and the example that they shared actually, which is that there is no cover between you and the building that you're about to go into. But then an Ursa pulls up, a friendly Ursa. Now you have cover between you and the building. That is an emergent environment. The Ursa now provides cover where there was no cover. So now you can stand behind the Ursa and get some cover, right? So that's an emergent environment, right? Now, what they want is that to be not just player driven, but they want the world to be emergent as well. So maybe you shoot down a wall, and now the person you're going against doesn't have any cover, so they're easier to shoot. Or maybe they shoot down your wall, and it's the same thing except where you don't have any cover. But in order to do that, they have to do this cover generation, use this cover generation tool and make that dynamic. So now the world will see at least 3 variations of cover generation. So if it's light green, the world will see it. If the world will mark full cover as light green. It will mark 3/4 cover as dark green, and then if it's only half cover, it'll be marked as red. Or if it's half cover or less, maybe it'll be marked as red. Now those colors could change, but you can imagine having a separate visor on that tells you whether it's full cover, dark color, full cover, 3/4 cover, or half cover. And maybe that you only see that if you have on a combat related visor, or maybe you only see it if you have on the full gear of that. And we'll talk about gear later. But you can imagine, you can see kind of where it's going, right? If the world can see it, this is what the world can see, right? But they can open that data up to the player to kind of give them more data about the world, but maybe they only open that up based on what suits you're wearing. You could see how that can mess with gameplay, right? So if I can tell that this person only has half cover, but they can't tell that because they don't know how to identify it just visually, then maybe I know if I shoot at them, I'm going to be much more effective. And maybe they think I'm behind 3/4 cover, but this is actually full cover. So them shooting at me is only going to be like, let's say 10% effective, whereas me shooting at them is going to be 75% effective or something like that. So now I know I'm in a great position. I can stay here, but they don't know that they should move, and then I end up winning that interaction. So that's where that stuff can matter. It's not just going to be emergent environments as far as like just a ship moving here or you blowing up a wall. It's also going to be user and designer made locations, right? So there's going to be player made locations, and the designers aren't just going to let AI have all the fun. They are still going to create stuff and put it in, right? So the more unique stuff, right? Like not to say that this won't be unique. This will create unique things, but more detailed stuff that maybe the AI can put in, but it would take more effort or more rules than they would want, right? So maybe they still design part of it, or maybe they let AI design the base of it, and then they go in and maybe they put like a poster in a certain place, or they move the crate to behind this special location, and things like that. So that stuff will still matter. Obviously, we'll get to base building, and that's going to be part of this as well. But they're also working on interior locations at places like ArcCorp. You know, they want all these buildings that you can go into, but it's not just going to be the same building. It's not going to be a cookie cutter building where it's like, oh, I've been in that building before, so I've been in all the buildings in this area. No, it's going to be unique to, it'll kind of have the same feel, because obviously, you know, you get the same architectural style, but it'll be different on the inside, and that's kind of key here. They're also, you know, they kind of slipped a few little like mind-blowing things in while they were talking about certain stuff. They said there's going to be domesticated animals, and they said tier 0 pets. They literally said tier 0 pets. Now, don't get super crazy or anything. We know that CIG has sometimes said things that don't ever come to fruition, or don't come to fruition as soon as they would hope. So, but they mentioned it, and that means that it goes from hopium level to like possible and likely, and that's the way we'll say it, possible and likely. We won't say definitely, we'll say possible and likely. All right, they showed that there was a Copian that was actively like just hanging out with an AI NPC. So they didn't necessarily say players can own the domesticated animals, but they've shown that NPCs can. So I just want to make that distinction. I don't want to be like, oh, we're gonna have dogs in, you know, the next patch or something like that, right? But a Copian was shown not attacking the NPC and helping the NPC search for whatever was creating a noise, right? And so all of this stuff, you know, is talking to them now about the AI, right? And like what the capabilities are of the AI and how the system can determine that, right? So it's not just that you have to put the locations, the weather, the grass, the flora, right? You also have to put things into the universe, right? So if you're putting people or Copians or other animals, right, they all have to have like a sense of the day and night cycle and passage of time. So that means they have to put the day and night cycle and the passage of time in the game. They have to have a certain level of perception. So this is another thing that I could see, maybe not the combat people having this on their visor, but maybe, you know, the maybe not all of the combat people, but maybe the people with a very high active scan, they can maybe see this. So what I'm talking about is the visibility of the NPC. So the NPC can see you clearly if it's green. If it's orange, then, you know, maybe they can see something and they'll investigate. And they'll investigate it pretty quickly, but they don't see you. They just see something and they'll be pretty quick to investigate. And if it's dark orange, that means they heard something, they maybe saw something, but they'll be very slow to investigate because they're not thinking too much of it. And then if it's red, that means they didn't see anything, and that maybe it just like something caught their eye, and they may not even investigate it because they thought it was like dust blowing in the wind or something. And so, you know, you got this green from seeing you all the way, this red, they barely even saw anything. And maybe, you know, and we'll talk about what I mean by active scan a little later. Some of you will already know what I'm talking about. Maybe all of you, if you've watched the day 1 and day 2 videos. But maybe if you have a very high active scan, you can actually see those colors, so you can tell when they can see you. And maybe if you have very high stealth or something like that, you can see those colors and on your visor. So again, these are ways that these things can affect the game in real ways. Like you might, if you're trying to, you know, ninja your way in, then you might be wanting to wear the stealth gear, which shows you, you know, where everybody's visibility lines are, kind of like Metal Gear Solid did if you've played that game, or multiple games, right? And then that also is going to matter for Maelstrom, right? So with Maelstrom, For those of you who don't know, Maelstrom is like the destruction technology that they're using, and they showed it at CitizenCon. Fully destructible environments, and they're dynamically generated, and they eventually regenerate. So that means, it'll be like a bunch of rocks in front of you, walls made of rock, right, or stone, whatever. And then you shoot it, and then the walls fall, or the cover deteriorates, and then eventually they regenerate. And they shouldn't be regenerating like after 10 seconds, right? Like it should take some time, and it should be realistic, right? Like, so if you walk away, but some other player is supposed to come to this area, and it's not just some random place in the woods, then it should eventually regenerate. And then you weren't there, so you don't know how it regenerated. You don't know if somebody came along and just fixed it or what. So it could still be in the realm of possibility that it was created the same way. So that is the end of Genesis Phase 3, Part 2. There is no Part 3, so my bad if I said Part 3 earlier. But then we'll move on to Genesis Phase 4 in the next one.